Alrighty. Please call the roll.
For the treasurer, Mr. Boykin. Here. For the director of finance, Ms. Ortega. Ms. Hendricks. Here. Mr. Rosensteel.
Here.
Chairperson Dillon, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Alrighty. I would entertain a motion to approve the committee agenda and work plan.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Any abstentions? Alrighty, we've approved that. Item number 1 is the approval of the minutes from November 6th.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve our minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Those have been approved. Alrighty, we have number 3, Cassandra, the evaluation of the asset class performance measures. So if you could please begin that for us, that would be great.
The purpose of this item is to discuss updating the performance measures for 2 of our asset classes, innovation and risk, and our infrastructure asset classes. In April of 2009, the committee discussed the performance measures for the innovation and risk asset classes and consulted with our investment consulting firm PCA and McLaughlin Partners, one of our compensation consultants, and determining the best performance measures for this asset class. After discussion, the committee determined that using a blended performance of the overall 5 asset classes was the best measure until this asset class had fully matured. Currently, as it stands now, we're going into year 3, we're at $1 billion of assets in this asset class portfolio. Similarly, in April and June of 2010, the committee discussed performance measures on our infrastructure asset class. For the first 2 years, the committee had decided to use, instead of an asset class performance, to split the performance measures at 50% total fund performance and 50% personal performance. The asset classes, generally, as they stand, weight the performance at 50% asset class performance, 30% total fund performance, and 20% personal performance. So this one is split 50-50, which is different even than the infrastructure asset class. The criteria established in the metrics for this asset class was to keep it at this 50-50 split until there was over $500 million of assets in this portfolio, which has been reached as of the end of this last year, I believe. Correct. Okay. So what the staff is recommending is that since these asset classes have matured to the level that we can establish their own incentive criteria for the measuring performance within the portfolios, that we engage one of the investment consultants to evaluate these asset classes and establish the incentive criteria to bring back to the board in June so that we could adopt these at the July meeting or June meeting for the 14-15 plan year.
Are there any questions? Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Cassandra covered it.
All right. No one is, oh, you know something? I don't even know if anybody's in line. Hang on just a second. Is anybody in line?
No, I mean, we just.
Okay. I didn't kick up the program. No one has any questions? All right, so moving on, Cassandra, if you can go to the next item for us while I get this kicked up. It looks like that we're willing to go to that in
Just
June.
on this item 3, we just need direction on who to consult with to, at some point, that we would use one of the investment consultants to move forward with that. So
And you need us to tell you who?
at some point, yes.
Well, maybe after your afternoon, your
Yeah, I was gonna say, right now you only have one.
So for innovation.
Yeah.
You can, depending what you do in the investment committee tomorrow, you could pick one of
Yeah.
2.
Yeah.
But either one's fine,
Approve
doesn't
the new
matter.
contract, yeah.
Can I just,
Go ahead.
I don't totally understand, so.
Go ahead and punch
Okay,
in and
you
see.
can follow up if you need a follow-up
There you
question.
go.
I don't completely understand that then. So we're looking at innovation and the infrastructure asset classes, and you're saying that we need to get can you explain so we need one of our investment, so I know we're having conversations tomorrow. And so if we move ahead, that one of our general investment consultants would weigh in on these two asset classes and the decisions we're making on this? Is that what you're
On the
saying?
performance measures.
performance
They would
measures?
help us figure out what the benchmark should be
Yeah.
for those two. And normally there's been a goal for the asset class to beat a benchmark. So first, should there be a goal to beat it? And if so, by how much? So like private equity is the benchmark plus 300. Other asset classes, it's the benchmark plus 90. We always have a maximum limit because we don't want them reaching for risk. Infrastructure and innovation are tough because there's no published benchmark out there to really grab. Everybody's kind of struggling with this. So it's going to be, we've been noodling on this for a long time. It'll be a work trying to figure this out. How do you measure innovation?
And through the conversation we have tomorrow, we'll be able to tell you which,
But Sharon, the big picture, from the very beginning of this comp plan back in 2003, is that when we started this, Chris? We've always used an outside investment consultant on metrics, because the comp consultants, although they're great on the strategy and design, they have not been comfortable advising you specific to the metrics of the benchmark. So historically, you relied on a PCA to do that. And of course, you don't want staff to set their own benchmarks, so.
I guess my question is, so PCA gave us input back in 2009, correct, about this, and basically said, you know, a blended benchmark, that sort of, we kind of, a makeshift kind of, is that?
These were,
or
yeah,
how would
these
you
were the
qualify
interim
that?
steps. Both of these asset classes were starting, they had no assets. And it didn't make sense to try and, start a benchmark from day one. And so the view was, here, let's do this as our interim step.
A stopgap.
Just do a blend. And then once they get a sufficient amount of assets, $1 billion for one, 500 million for the other, then we can switch to a benchmark. And that's where we're at the point where now they're both almost about 3 years old and they're ready to be on their own benchmarks.
So we've hit that billion mark with the innovation portfolio, and so that's triggered this need to get input and land on a more specific benchmark for innovation. a specific
And part of the
benchmark
thing is
for-
we use 3-year time periods. So now you at least have a track record. Before you would have not had anything. And a lot of the investments have a J curve. For everybody that remembers, that's where you expect to lose a little bit of money. You pay fees at the beginning before the return kicks in. So it's part of recognition of that. And you recognize these are both still fairly new areas, not widely adopted by all the pension plans. So there's not the robust benchmarks out in the world that we could just, snap and grab and do this. We'll have to put our heads together and really work on it.
I guess I was wondering though, with infrastructure, I know there has been work in that arena in other funds, and so.
That's going to be our first stop, is to check in, particularly with Canada.
With
PERS
Canada.
has struggled with, I've talked to them, they've struggled with infrastructure. How do you measure it? Is it just a return target? Is it a spread over inflation, which is what a lot of people use, but it doesn't, just like we've had problems in the other asset classes, if you don't have a benchmark that can really measure what the investment opportunity is, then you lose some of that motivation you want out of an incentive plan to begin with. So we'll sit down and look at what best practices are around the world for both of these and come back to you. One thing is clear, we want it to be as simple and straightforward so the public understands, but the employee understands. And the point is to serve as a motivation to do a good job, to meet your goals for those asset classes.
I'm sorry, do other plans have an innovation fund or have something like our fund?
Succinctly, the answer is no.
Okay.
I have actually done a lot of work looking at like the scientific laboratories and stuff. And that's where innovation is going to be hard, because you want to motivate people to take some risks and maybe try something that doesn't work as well. And the conclusion, by doing it in a small size in a laboratory, we find out it doesn't work before we put $1 billion at it. So it's going to be interesting. That is a real challenging area, because there aren't as many examples to tap into. I would tell you we've already been through 4 variations within the staff. So we've been noodling on this for a while.
So my last question, I promise, is, so then how do we as a board make a decision about who we assign, who we ask? Is that something the investment committee will discuss?
Yeah, that's kind of, that's an interesting question. You've never had a choice before, so I don't know. It's up to you whether you want to just empower the chair of the investment committee, what. Now you actually have a choice, so it's up to you guys.
I guess what I'm
Historically,
asking
as
is-
Jack said, it's been since 2003, for a decade, it's always been PCA was the loan investment consultant, so we went to them. It's kind of interesting, both firms are the two independent fiduciaries when it comes to infrastructure. So the nice thing is either firm would be at least the leading expert in that field. Neither of them are going to have anything they can pull off the shelf for innovation. We've already asked, so.
So that's not an action item for today. This is informational. So are we just gonna talk about it in June and that's when we'll decide, or?
You would give us
Well,
instruction on which one you wanted us to do the task. It might be procedurally, if I can jump out there, it might be nice for the investment committee to decide who they want to task that assignment with, or allow the chair of the investment committee tomorrow to decide. We would come back to you in June with plans, because under your procedures, you want to usually adopt these before we start the new incentive year. So before July 1st, you'd want to have them kind of printed up.
Yeah, we need to have it adopted before we go into the plan year if we're going to make changes to the metrics to provide appropriate notification to staff and know what they're going to be performing against.
So at the June meeting,
Right.
okay.
Paul?
Yes, sort of along the lines of some of Sharon's questions, but the innovation portfolio, as I understand it, is really sort of, its responsibility is to explore some things and experiment a little bit. And whenever you ask somebody to experiment a little bit, sometimes, the experiments don't pan out. So I'm sort of confused about how you develop a benchmark based on performance when you've tasked the innovation staff to do something that is going to lead to some failures, which is why we've.
Which in theory is okay. We want them to test it out.
Which in theory is okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, that's why
we're not giving them huge amounts of money, but we're hoping that they're going to give us some insights into some strategies that are going to pay off. But
what I have done is, instead of studying other plans, is I've tended to look at, I'm going to call them the chemical companies, but people like 3M, GE, who are famous for their laboratories, and there are a lot of papers written out of the universities on how do you motivate those people, and that's exactly one of the points, is you don't want to punish them for failures. People point out sticky notes, Post-it notes is the classic example. I guess that scientist was trying to find a different type of glue, but then ended up with that, thought, oh, this is useless, but then now it's their best product, or one of their best products. So the common metric is, did they create a product, and then you measure the sales, not the net return, but the sales on those products. That doesn't work as much for us, so we're noodling around with things. Could be just what we're kind of looking at is things like the Sharpe ratio. Did the things they find improve the Sharpe ratio of the fund? Because the goal of that unit is to find things first, pardon me for getting into the details, but first, can they find an investment that enhances our return and reduces our risk? We kind of say if those existed, we'd know about them. But next, can they find things that reduce our risk and keep the return the same? Or can they find something that enhances the return but doesn't expand the risk? And so the risk-return balance is really what I'm kind of zeroing in on, and that's things like the Sharpe ratio or the information ratio. And so it'd be a little difficult for the public to understand how we're measuring them, but that's at least kind of the direction after looking at lots of options of even, substructures of the things they're looking at. What we really want to measure is, are they being creative? Are they thinking and studying lots of interesting things, looking outside the box, so they're rewarded for that. And I know we have always liked hard quantitative measures. We may have to put some qualitative measures in on these. And I say when we haven't liked them, that's past compensation committees. There are problems with surveys or those type of things, but I think we've actually used them recently fairly successfully as we've transitioned people. And we use them, obviously extensively on the personal evaluation score. So I think our qualitative measures are actually getting better and more robust in the way we do it and fair for the people and the process. So we may end up with a blend of kind of that qualitative, are they adding value, as well as quantitative, are they finding a better Sharp ratio?
Sharon?
Well, and I think that was your point, Paul, is not penalize, sort of, there's not a egregious penalty to Stephen and their group for, maybe taking more risk or thinking differently, that there's equity in terms of, his ability to reach the benchmark, as opposed to other asset classes.
I was at a conference recently, sorry Sharon, and people kept asking us, so what is that? What is the goal? And I finally said, in a nutshell, Stephen and the team's job is to find out if it really is as advertised. Does it work for us as it was advertised? Because we've been around money managers who all say they're number one, their product is the best, oh, this is going to solve it, beat the world, this is the best thing. Well, they get to sort of test drive it and find out at CalSTRS structure, does it work as it's advertised? And interestingly, we're at about 18 months in one thing, and we're kind of coming to the conclusions we're not sure that works as advertised for us. Other people will buy it, but those are the kind of things we want to reward them to do in small size. Some of their investments are no more than $30 million, which is a lot of money normally, but.
Well, it'll be interesting to sort of see what we come up with, because I do think, in my mind as a fiduciary, I think of value added, and does this add value to the system? Does it add value to, our bottom line? And I think that, that's sort of in the back of my mind, and it is challenging to, how do you quantify that in these particular arenas? I think infrastructure, there is a little bit more, history, and there's some other ways to look at that. So.
Because the value add might be reducing risk.
Right, exactly.
Alrighty. Any other questions? Alrighty, guess we make that decision. Do we want to make that decision tomorrow, or do we want to leave it up to the investment chair to select the consultant moving forward? Leave it to the investment chair? Pleasure of the committee. Grant?
Thanks. So the option is just have staff choose among the.
No,
No.
we were never offering that.
No.
It's your decision. Just, I think the question is, are you doing it through the,
think
Would
the
we-
option
would
is-
we- I mean, one option, I guess, would be a formal, they're both in our pool, but you could do a
Yeah.
formal.
one or
letter.
both?
Yeah, I guess we always like to, that's essentially going out to bid to them. That's always the treasurer's preference.
Yeah, well, they'll both be on a retainer.
Yeah.
So it'd be in their scope, both of them could do it.
Yeah.
So
I would think you
question
either
is
have the
whether it's
comp committee
chair of investments or-
chair pick it, or the board, or the investment committee chair, unless you want another meeting
No, I'm
tomorrow
fine.
afternoon.
The investment chair and vice chair make that
Yes.
we good with that? Terry, you good with that?
He's just hanging
You
out.
want to weigh in, Susie, you're here? No,
All
okay.
right.
Okay, that's what we will do then. Thank you very much. Cassandra, you have what you need. Okay, next item, item 4,
This item is to propose a new investment class development for an interim classification into the portfolio manager series or classification. This last year, we had on the work plan to develop and look at the organizational structure and investments and evaluate the progression of staff development or the classifications within the investments branch. And we looked at externally at the other our public pension fund across the river and looked at their classification structures to assess how we are competitively with them. For our investment staff, we are using the same pool of, target of compensation structure for looking at it. What they have done, however, is developed an interim or a associate portfolio manager. It's a stepping stone into the portfolio manager classification. That classification study is at CalHR. We've evaluated that and wanted to develop something similarly. In particular, since we redesigned the classification structures of our investment class series, the difference between the investment officer 3 classifications, which are rank and file classifications, into portfolio manager has grown exponentially since those have changed. There's a 47% difference from the top of the IO3 to the portfolio manager classification. What Chris has done is looked at the investment class and wants to develop, similarly to CalPERS, is an associate portfolio manager to have a bridging classification for development of staff moving into the more senior portfolio manager positions. So we would like to get direction to go ahead and move forward with the development of this classification, to have you look at the specifications and approve that and have a recommendation on the salary structure for that classification. Then we would move forward upon your approval to CalHR and SPB to have it formally formalized at this oversight level of state government. In the meantime, however, since that process can take up to a year, if you are positive about moving forward with that, then we would like to lower the portfolio manager salary range at the low end and have the opportunity to make temporary appointments into the classification up to 2 years so that we can have some interim progression of staff from the investment officer 3 classifications to the portfolio manager classifications. And then once we get the classification permanently established, then we can go out and recruit for those permanent positions. I know that's complex, and I would be happy to answer questions.
Discussion?
Done, actually.
Dana?
Remind me.
I have a question about kind of long-term as staff in the investment officer 3 position develop to the point where you want to move them into this associate position. Does the associate position also have duties that then require a backfilling of the person who was the investment officer 3, so that you end up having kind of this growing staff because you're creating that new position? So I support it in the context of giving you more room to develop staff and let them move forward without having that big jump. But I have a concern about then a creeping need to keep backfilling the other position.
No, I absolutely hear you. And I want to emphasize, as we've tried to say to staff, these are not based on people's individual talents or the ability for them to move. It's based on the job. And that's what we're saying is that when you look at a portfolio manager job and an IO3 job, we think we need a transition position in between those. So I'll pick on some examples. Some portfolio managers run as much as $8 billion, but they're doing it alone. And then the next level of discretion is like less 500 million. We need to be able to have a person on the trade desk that fills that gap, that has discretion between the 500 million and maybe not up to 8 billion, but up to 3 billion. So that somebody isn't going from a small amount of responsibility all of a sudden to a large amount of responsibility. And this pressure point has been coming up for a while, of the gap between these two different positions. It's different in some of the asset classes. In the trade desks, it's more, you could see it in the trading authority. In the other areas like real estate and private equity, it's more it shows up again in the decision-making authority, but it's not as easy to identify. So what we're process of doing, along with CalPERS, they've already started it, but is to write that position description so it's clear. So to answer your question succinctly, we wouldn't see of people moving up and creating more positions. What we would see is that some of our investment officer 3 jobs we'd want to add to the scope, and they would become associate portfolio manager jobs. We don't have the ability to add more PYs or positions unless it's through the budget process. So what this does for us is it does create a nice career path all the way up so that there's a smooth transition of authority, responsibility, and the skills, knowledge, and ability required. We're fortunate that we have some people that we think could do that, but it won't be that. And what has happened with, if there's an internal person that wins an award, then yes, there is a cascade down of the vacancy. But all of these positions, particularly the portfolio manager and up, very open recruitments. We often advertise, even sometimes hire executive recruiters. So these positions are all very competitive. The value of teaming up with PERS in this process is we're hoping CalHR will see, okay, now we have 2 entities that need this. It also means that our staffs will cross-compete back and forth. Our IO3s and theirs will compete for these opportunities.
So in your example, the person who had the $500 million portfolio moves into $4 billion. Does that $500 million responsibility come with them? Or is there then a vacancy for a person to be managing that smaller portfolio?
No, yeah, we would change, the idea for us is we would change the job. There would not be another new position. We would take some of our IO3 jobs and have them become these associate portfolio managers. And as the directors look at this, there may be, where some asset classes, I think we have 5 portfolio managers contemplated in the future. Not now, we have 4, but they may say, you know what, I don't need 5 under this structure. I could get away with 3 PMs and have 3 associate PMs. So we would just incorporate this. I should have answered that more succinctly.
Bob?
I had the same questions as Irena, so I passed. Thank you for answering the questions, Chris.
Alrighty,
I'll just ask.
Sharon?
So I'm assuming you want approval to move forward and then we'll see a job description or something.
Right, well, it's not an action item, we just want to
Okay.
get direction
Okay.
that you would like us to go ahead and move forward with the development of the classification to bring back to you. It is one of the ones that you are, it's under your governance, so we want to make sure it's something that you would like us to move forward with, and also the interim process of lowering this.
Salary bands.
Yeah, so what we would do is come back in June with a classification and a recommendation on the salary for that classification, and then also a recommendation on what should we lower that, the portfolio manager to on an interim basis for temporary appointments, because we would need to have a consultant come in and ask McLaughlin what would be the salary range for this classification, and what would your recommendation be on lowering it for an interim solution?
So will we though at that point have kind of, I guess what I'm envisioning is sort of bullet points of, what the job description of this new position would be?
We'll have the classification specification done.
That's what the
We're writing it
classification-
now. Yeah, we've been working with, investment staff, and have also looked at what CalPERS has put together, and we're developing those classification specifications, which is a list of the competencies and knowledge, skills, and abilities that we would be seeking for these new positions.
Yeah, I think anything that broadens the career path, because I've heard you talk, Chris, about, I think in developing skills and, I completely support broadening the career path for folks here, for our investment staff, and wanting to kind of give them a next place to go, so.
We have, and when you look at our organization, we have 2 stress points, and they've both been on either side of the portfolio manager. One between IO3 and portfolio manager, and the other between portfolio manager and director. We'll work with the sort of what PERS calls the senior portfolio manager. We'll work on that later. We've decided this is a much more critical pressure point so that we have a smoother line of managing the portfolios, work, and then it becomes a career path. But that's why I want to get to Arena's point of we'd be changing the desk's duties, not creating another layer of positions. It would be looking at more of a streamline instead of a huge jump in responsibilities, more of a streamline. And as Cassandra pointed out, it's the uniqueness that you have salary setting authority, but you don't have the ability to create positions. That belongs to CalHR. So you can do some part of it, but we have to have a 2-pronged process of a near-term stopgap, and then hopefully the long-term of creating it in the state system.
So my question then is it would go to CalHR, but it also goes to the State Personnel Board. Are those like one and the same type of, are those 2 really distinct processes?
A lot of their responsibilities have been combined in the new CalHR department. There is some still constitutional oversight that SPB does keep, and that is at this point, the approval of new classifications.
Can, the first step will be CalHR,
Right.
then the State Personnel Board?
Right.
HR could approve and State Personnel Board could still deny?
I mean, they could, yeah.
Unlikely?
I mean, we do have the ability to create the classification, so, but there are steps in the process. I mean, there's union notification, there's things that CalHR does that is, They have all of those responsibilities. And then it does go to the Department of Finance to make sure that we have the funding. So, it'll be,
Alright.
right.
Grant?
Just to your point, Dana, both CalHR and SPB have members, have a representative on the CalPERS board. And CalPERS is also working on this, so
Okay. Thank you. Alrighty, we're gonna try this a little differently than last time. As long as there's no objection, we will move forward. Any objections? Ha! We're gonna get this down.
I like that, Dana. I like that approach.
That was,
Very
that was a
nice.
speed up rule.
Well done.
Alrighty, thank you. Cassandra, do you have anything for the HR executive report?
No, nothing.
Our next item is review of information requests. I don't recall hearing any. Thank you, Chris. Draft agenda is on page comp 27. Do we have a closed session? No. So we have a
I'm sorry.
closed session in June for today's closed session, but we don't have a closed session.
We do have oh, I'm sorry. We do
not
have a
on our
closed session in
agenda.
June for performance target setting for the CEO, CIO.
Right. But
Right.
number 2 on the closed session is approval of minutes for this meeting.
Right, so I can take that
But
off.
we need to take that
Yeah.
off, because we didn't have a closed session.
Yeah.
Unless it's just
Good
not
point.
on our agenda, and if it's not on our agenda, I don't think we better go there.
No, it's.
Right,
it's-
Brian?
we don't. No, we don't.
Okay, alrighty. And then we have the open session meeting, the open session items. These policy 7 and 8 can be done for action even though they're under information, because you're coming back with possibly policy recommendations on both of those.
Right,
And they can be taken off of informational and acted upon.
right.
Alrighty,
Yes.
alrighty. Are there any questions on the draft agenda then, other than what we've already gone through? Then we are adjourned. Oh, any statements from the public? Nobody's at the mics?
So we're still thinking 1 o'clock, shoots for the audience,
Yes.
for open, okay, great, for the board meeting, good.